All right, first of all, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll go ahead and get started. And I just want to start by introducing myself to those of you who don't already know me. My name is Sandy Shackleford, and I'm the Director of Planning and Transportation for the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission. And we also staff and manage the Charlottesville-Albemarle Metropolitan Planning Organization. Tonight, what we're going to do is I'm going to start by introducing you to a panel of staff from the Virginia Department of Transportation, as well as Albemarle County and the city of Charlottesville. And all of these folks have been an integral part of this project so far. We'll briefly review the Smart Scale application process, which is the program that we are going to be applying for funding through, discuss the background of this project, talk about what we've done to seek feedback from the community, discuss impacts that need to be factored into our decision making, what are going to be our next steps for pursuing funding, and then we'll wrap up with a general period of questions and comments. So there's a slight delay, so it might take just a pause between the slides to load. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. You are all going to be muted during the webinar, and I will pause periodically throughout the webinar to see if there are any questions or comments. If you'd like to ask a question using the webinar audio, you'll need to use the raise your hand feature located at the bottom of the screen, and myself or one of the other moderators will unmute you. You'll also probably have to unmute yourself. So there's a little microphone looking button at the bottom of your screen that you can use to unmute yourself. Or if you're using a phone, you can also press *6. You can also type your question into the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen. And if one of the panelists is able to type a response to your question, they will go ahead and do so. We'll also review unanswered questions during the question breaks. All right. As I mentioned, the MPO has been working very closely with VDOT, the city of Charlottesville, and Albemarle County, who are all joining me tonight as panelists for this webinar. Chuck Proctor is the planning manager with the VDOT Culpeper District and has been the VDOT project manager on this project. We also have Chris Jensick, Parks and Recreation Planner. I do not see Brennan Duncan at this point. He might be able to join us a little bit later, but if needed, we do have some other folks from the city that may be able to answer questions if they come up. And then we also have Tim Padalino, Chief of Parks, Jessica Hirsch-Ballering, Principal Transportation Planner, and Kevin McDermott, Planning Manager, all joining us from Albemarle County. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is to get started talking about the Smart Scale funding application process. Smart Scale is the application process that Virginia uses to prioritize and fund transportation projects throughout the state. Every 2 years, eligible entities, which include local and regional bodies, have the opportunity to submit funding applications for desired transportation improvements. These are competitive applications, so our region will be competing with projects across the state for a limited pool of funding. Projects are scored based on their overall benefits related to cost. And basically, projects that have the highest benefits to cost ratios are funded. The benefit score for each project are determined based on the criteria that are shown here. Scores are tabulated across a number of key measures based on the project's ability to mitigate negative impacts and support the state's identified goals for its transportation network. And then these key measures are used to generate the benefit score, and that benefit score is then divided by the project cost. In 2020, the MPO Policy Board adopted a policy to select potential smart scale projects early in the process in order to facilitate stronger stakeholder and public engagement in the development of our smart scale applications. This slide shows the process that we've been working through starting in March of 2021. Part of the policy was that among the projects that were identified as being developed into applications, the MPO could identify projects that needed additional opportunities for input prior to being submitted as an application. This Rivanna River bike ped crossing was identified as a project that would benefit from additional stakeholder and community input. A stakeholder advisory committee was approved by the policy board for this project in the fall and has been meeting monthly starting in November to discuss the pros and cons of the project options. And so I see there's at least one hand raised, but I'm going to go ahead and pause here to see if there are any questions just generally about Smart Scale before we move on. Hold on one second. Yeah, I see one hand raised. Mr. Redding, go ahead and unmute yourself and you can ask your question.
Yes, the slides are much too small. They're only about an inch across and maybe an inch high and about an inch and a half across. So we can't read anything on the slides.
The slides aren't showing in full, the full screen?
No, we see your face the whole time. And the slides are just kind of strung up next to you on your left-hand side.
Yeah, I think that might be a setting on your computer. So to check your settings, if you go up to the right-hand corner of your screen, do you see the view button?
Yes, I've tried both of them. I've tried them. It doesn't make a difference.
Both of those? Okay, it looks like there aren't others that are having problems. So I would try those settings. Otherwise, those will be, these will be posted. The presentation will be posted on the website afterwards. Okay. And I apologize for that.
That's quite all right.
Any other questions? All right. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on then to the next section where we're going to give you a little bit of background about the project. So now we're going to talk about how we got to the point where we're discussing the two bridge options that are now before us for consideration at this point. The need or desire for a bicycle and pedestrian bridge crossing the Rivanna River has shown up in planning documents dating back to the mid-2000s. Many of you are already aware, but this isn't the only location where a bike and pedestrian crossing is desired. Other locations have potential benefits that have also been identified. And the three primary locations that are often brought up in discussions are a crossing between Dardentown Park and Penn Park near Free Bridge to provide a more comfortable crossing alternative for bicyclists and pedestrians. And then the crossing we're discussing tonight between Pantops and Woolen Mills. The reason we selected this location first out of the three is because it has the biggest opportunity to meet a transportation network gap in addition to providing recreational benefits for users. There's a lot of commuting opportunity between the Woolen Mills and Pantops areas based on commercial developments. And there's also a recreational benefit for the bridge to serve as a cross-river connection between the Rivanna Trail system on the west side of the river and the Old Mills Trail on the east side of the river. In 2019, the MPO worked with VDOT to retain the services of a consulting firm, VHB, to conduct a feasibility study to determine potential locations for a bridge between Pantops and Woolen Mills. VHB initially identified 6 potential crossing options and worked with state and local staff to assess the feasibility of these sites. Crossings were eliminated based on a number of criteria, including steep slopes, accessibility considerations, right-of-way impacts, and known protected resources. So out of these original 6 options, 2 options remain, shown on this diagram as options 1 and options 4. So those are the 2 that are currently still under consideration. The 2 alignments that remained are the ones that you can see here on this diagram. So this shows you the map. Here is the top option between Pantops and Chesapeake Street, and then this lower option, which is between Pantops and the Wool Factory development site near the end of East Market Street. The top alignment is referred to as a Chesapeake Street alignment. It spans from what we are dubbing the State Farm property on the east side of the river to the end of Chesapeake Street on the west side of the river, landing near Riverview Park. The bottom alignment is referred to as the East Market Street alignment, and it also spans from a State Farm property on the east side of the river to the near the end of East Market Street, which is technically private property that's owned by the Wool Factory. Because this is a transportation project, both alignments are required to have logical termini that provide access to the existing transportation network. That means that from either of the bridge landing sites on the east side of the river, a shared use path will need to be constructed to facilitate travel from the end of the bridge to the transportation network at the intersection of Peter Jefferson Parkway and State Farm Boulevard. So you can see that in the diagram as these white dotted lines. Those are the proposed shared use paths. On the west side of the river, the bridge landing would tie into the transportation network either through a direct connection at Chesapeake Street, so right there it would connect to the road system, or through a public use easement on the private development site of the wool factory right here. Also important to note is that the connections on the east side of the river will result in a connection at the same intersection. So the primary distinction between the two sites is the landing location on the west side of the river. The consultants prepared a rendering of what a bridge could potentially look like at both of the proposed locations. The sketch shown here shows a rendering of a cable-stayed bridge across the Rivanna River at the Chesapeake Street site. It is important to note that either location could involve a different bridge design, but this is intended to provide a glimpse of the potential visual impact of a bridge at the two locations. The elevation of the Chesapeake Street alignment is higher than the more southern alignment at East Market Street and would require a single span. The planning level engineering cost estimate for this style of bridge at this location is $11.3 million. So this should be considered as very preliminary since there are still a number of technical analyses that would be completed as part of the project engineering before cost estimates could be more accurately determined. The sketch here shows the potential visual impact of a two-span arched truss bridge at the East Market Street location. This bridge would have a pier that rests on the island. The elevation is lower at this location, so the water clearance is reduced compared to the first option. Again, at this location, a different bridge design could be installed, although the cost would also be altered. The planning level cost estimate, although likely to increase as the engineered plans are developed, is intended to provide an understanding of the cost differential between the different bridge options. So the planning level engineered cost estimate for the bridge at East Market Street was about $15.3 million. In November of 2020, MPO staff facilitated a webinar reviewing the facility feasibility study with the public, addressing many of the technical questions that had arisen as part of the feasibility study. The purpose of that webinar was to provide an opportunity for the public to ask questions about the feasibility study and share comments and thoughts. But the MPO did not have clear guidance on moving forward towards project implementation at that time. The feedback that was received has informed the engagement process we have been conducting over the last several months. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and pause again and see if there are any questions. Anybody have any questions on the project background before we move forward? No. Yes, Mr. Ignatz, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, and looking at those cost estimates, they seem to be very excessive to me. Now, $11 million and $15 million for a trail bridge. You can buy prefabricated trail bridges ranging anywhere from $500 a foot to $2,000 a foot. And so, I mean, and you already have a truss style bridge at the Woolen Mills. And so I think that would probably be the preferred style of bridge to place, which would be much cheaper than either of those two options, I think. And I think given that we are in a university town and University of Virginia has an engineering department, I think it would be smart to engage the engineering students there to come up with some plans rather than going to a commercial engineering firm. I think it would save a lot of money.
I can take an initial shot at answering that question, and from what I understand, a large portion of the cost is not related to the actual construction of the bridge itself, but the costs involved with the installation and construction. But I'm going to go ahead and see if Chuck Proctor, the VDOT planning manager, would like to respond to that comment.
Yeah, if you go with a simple truss bridge, it is cheaper. And if you look in the documentation and estimates, they do give a price for a simple truss bridge, for a section of a simple truss bridge. And the square foot, the cost per linear foot is significantly lower than a arched arch truss and a cable stay bridge. It's just the aesthetics of it, it may come into play, and that's part of what we gave some options for different types of bridges that might be more aesthetically pleasing to users of the river instead of looking at a traditional truss bridge like you might see for a railroad or something like that.
Thank you, Chuck. Mr. Condor, would you, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Ignatz, did you have a follow-up question or comment? You might have to unmute yourself. I might have accidentally muted you again. There you go.
I think the single stay suspension type bridge is very attractive, but frankly, the ones I've seen, the span is far too small for that to have a dramatic aesthetic impact. Plus, you're going from a somewhat residential area in either case to a forested trail. It's completely inappropriate. It's out of place. A standard trail style bridge is what you really should be looking at.
We will make sure that that comment is documented and passed on to the decision makers for their consideration. Mr. Condor, would you like to go ahead and share your comment?
Yes, it might be perhaps useful to show option number 3, which is a truss style bridge with a slightly different alignment. Might answer a few of the questions.
I did not have that prepared to bring up, but I do have an image of another truss style bridge that we'll look at a little bit later in the presentation. All right, we'll go ahead and keep moving forward then. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is what we've done so far to conduct engagement in order to gather information that will be used to inform the decision-making about the bridge alignment and design. First of all, the Stakeholder Advisory Committee was made up of a mix of technical staff, community organization representatives, and citizen planners, and they were appointed by the MPO Policy Board. This committee has been meeting monthly since November and also conducted an on-site visit to the proposed landing sites on the Woolen Mills side of the river to assess the potential impacts of both alignments. This advisory committee has discussed many important potential impacts of the 2 alignments on the surrounding area and helped identify the relative pros and cons of the 2 alignments. The Stakeholder Advisory Committee meetings have been open to the public, and the meeting agendas have included an open comment and question period at the end of each meeting. We are holding this public meeting tonight to review the information that has been discussed with the public and to provide an opportunity for the more general public to ask questions and provide feedback. There's a survey that will be live until March 4th, where the public can provide input on the preference between the 2 alignments and the bridge design. And there's also a comment form that can be completed on the MPO Smart Scale webpage to share comments. I'll share a link for the project at the end of this webinar tonight. To get the word out about this project and what the opportunities are to provide comments, we made sure to notify all of the MPO committees and the stakeholder advisory committees to share the opportunities through their networks. We sent out a postcard mailing to all the addresses within a half-mile buffer of any of the bridge landings, posted information through our social media platforms, and provided information to local media and community organizations on request that help to distribute the information and raise awareness of the engagement opportunities. And so now we're going to get into the discussion on the different impacts that we discussed as part of the evaluation of these 2 bridge options. And I realize this is probably where a lot of the discussion will happen. I do not have a designated point to stop and address questions, but I'll be looking at the activity along the way, and we'll pause as necessary to respond to questions and comments. So the first thing that we did was create a list of the factors that we needed to make sure we covered as part of the discussion. The factors were informed by the MPO's Citizens Transportation Advisory Committee, and then they were reviewed by the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. So the first thing I want to talk about tonight is how this bridge potentially fits into the overall network connectivity for the area. The need for overall improved connectivity is well known to most of us that have been involved in this process, and probably to most of you all as well. This bridge is not intended to solve all of the network connectivity concerns in the area near the proposed landing sites, but is intended to solve a very important network gap in the local area, which is providing a path for bicyclists and pedestrians to cross the river, which is currently a barrier to movement. However, how the bridge fits in with the overall network connectivity in the area is an important consideration in informing the bridge alignment that is selected. So the orange dots that you see here at the bottom right side of your screen, those show the approximate locations of the landing sites. And then the colored paths show the primary routes that a user may take to access different parts of Charlottesville from the proposed landing sites. Notably, the two bridges are less than 1/4 mile apart. So while some of the routes are more direct from the bridge landing sites, navigating the preferred route from either of the alignments is very feasible. The red line shown here at the top, it shows a direct travel route down Chesapeake Street, which connects to Mead Park in addition to providing access to downtown Charlottesville. It also provides a direct connection to the shared use path that connects to the Cole Tower Trail, which is shown right here in gray. There are continuous sidewalks down one side of Chesapeake Street, but there's no dedicated bike infrastructure along this route. There actually isn't any dedicated bike infrastructure along any of the routes. Feedback has also included the fact that Chesapeake Street is hilly and narrow compared to some of the other roads in the general area. This middle line right here in blue is the direct connection along East Market Street. There's a lower traffic volume on East Market Street near the proposed landing site. So this section right here has a very low traffic volume. But the section connecting to the bridge landing strip is very narrow and includes a steep incline. There's also inconsistent sidewalk infrastructure along East Market Street, although it also provides a direct connection to the Cole Tower Trail. And then the green line at the bottom here, this shows the route along Broadway Street. So users could access Broadway Street from the landing site at the end of East Market Street through the public use easement that goes through the Wool Factory development site. But this would involve traveling through the main parking area of the development with no dedicated bicycle or pedestrian pathways. Broadway Street is wide and there are opportunities for future bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure to be installed along the street, but it does not currently exist and there are no set plans for that to move forward on any specific schedule. Right. In addition to connections to the transportation network system, also under consideration is how the bridge will facilitate travel along the trail system. There are two trail systems on either side of the river currently. There's the Old Mills Trail along the east side of the river, shown by the dotted green line right here. And then along the other side of the river, the west side of the river, is the Rivanna Trail system, which are shown with these green lines. The Chesapeake Street alignment would provide a direct access to the Rivanna Trail system at Riverview Park, and the East Market Street alignment would provide a more direct access point to the Rivanna Trail system through the Wool Factory development site. While either portion of the Rivanna Trail can be accessed from either of the bridge landing sites, travel between the sections at Riverview Park and the Wool Factory currently requires short distances to be traveled on the road. You can see that in red, those are gaps in the actual trail where you'd have to get off the trail and travel along the road network in order to make that connection. As we've discussed the proposed alignments of this bridge with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, parking has been a major topic of discussion due to existing parking shortages at Riverview Park. It is outside the scope of this project to alleviate the existing parking demands, but understanding the concerns that there will continue to be incremental impacts if a bicycle and pedestrian bridge is placed at this location, we've worked with the city and county staff to discuss potential options to explore increased parking facilities. It is important to note that increasing the availability of alternative modes of transportation that includes improved bicycle and pedestrian connectivity, as well as coordination with transit schedules and stops, is an important factor in alleviating parking demand. So you provide more ways to get to the park, that reduces some of the demand for parking at the site itself. There are opportunities to expand and manage parking in the vicinity of the park in other ways that can also be explored. These include developing new parking at the site of the former pumping station, So many of you all are familiar with this area, the kind of open area located at the end of Chesapeake Street. This would be located near the proposed landing site. We could also talk about whether or not the state acquisition of property along the railroad at the bottom of Steep Hill Street, shown here, might present an opportunity to create some overflow spaces. And potentially, if parking management is an issue, we could talk about what it might look like to restrict parking along Chesapeake Street to provide some relief to the local residential community. Those again are just things that we could explore and are probably things that need to be considered regardless of whether the bridge is located at the site or not. In addition to considering expanding parking facilities on the Woolen Mill side of the river, Albemarle County is also exploring opportunities to increase trailhead parking in the Pantops area, which combined with the bicycle and pedestrian bridge can also serve to mitigate some of the existing and future parking demand near Riverview Park and near the Woolen Mills area more generally. At the wool factory itself, there are 10 spaces that are dedicated for recreational users. There is abundant off-peak parking, and currently parking is available on site for public use by the development if it's not in use for their business needs, but additional spaces cannot be dedicated for recreational use. All right. Going on to talk about ADA accessibility. This is a requirement for any transportation project. And the requirement is that any new infrastructure intended for bicycle or pedestrian use has a grade of 5% or less, unless it is adjacent to an existing roadway that has a grade in excess of 5% already. As presented in the feasibility study that was conducted, there's a section of the shared use path on the Pantops side that connects from East Market Street, the East Market Street alignment, that exceeds the 5% grade requirement, and that section will have to be rerouted to reduce the grade. While the project itself can still meet the ADA requirements, it was noted during the discussion with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee that traveling from the landing site near East Market Street would require users to move up grades of more than 5% along the established transportation network in order to get to the road network. That last section of East Market Street going down towards the landing site is very steep, and also going through the development site would require travel up a driveway that is also very steep. So it's not required that this project resolves that grade, that the steepness of that slope, but it was something that was noted by the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. All right, regarding floodplain impacts and resiliency, we spent some time discussing the potential impacts related to the two alignment options. These hash lines right here show the floodway, and then the outside area shown in the lighter color green is the 100-year floodplain. The feasibility study that was prepared noted that both alignments would require hydraulic modeling to determine impacts to the 100-year floodplains. However, the East Market Street alignment is at a lower elevation, and it has a lower clearance over the water than the Chesapeake Street alignment. And it also has a higher risk of impacting the floodplain as a result. As far as the longer term resiliency considerations, there is again more risk with the alignment at East Market Street due to the lower clearance over the floodplain should flooding activity increase in this area. Transit access. The local area is currently served by the Charlottesville Area Transit. On the Pantops side, the closest stop is near Martha Jefferson Hospital, so shown right here. And then on the Woolen Mill side, there's an existing stop mid-block on Riverside Avenue. There's also a transit stop on Chesapeake Street near Riverview Street, so it's off the screen, but it's up, if you're coming up Chesapeake Street, it's up this way a little ways. As far as future transit connectivity, Albemarle County has recently collaborated with the Charlottesville Area Transit to apply for a demonstration grant to pilot microtransit services throughout Pantops, which would include access to the shared use path connection that was shown on the previous slide. So it would provide more direct access to this intersection. On the west side of the river, transit connectivity in close proximity to the bridge landing site on Chesapeake Street is more feasible. East Market Street is narrow and would make transit vehicle movement along that corridor more challenging. And while there could be opportunities to expand transit access along Broadway Street, it would still require greater travel distances to the bridge landing site on East Market Street from any transit stop. All right. All right, water safety and recreational use was another factor that was discussed during the Stakeholder Advisory Committee meetings. The Stakeholder Advisory Committee discussed how each of the proposed bridge design options would potentially impact water safety and recreational use of the river. At both locations, the bridge designs intentionally avoided the placement of piers within the waterway itself. So that removes any obstacles that would potentially have to be navigated around for those that are boating or floating along the river. But regardless of the location, river access would be disrupted during the construction of the bridge. Those will be short term. Regarding utilities, MPO staff spoke with the Rivanna Wastewater and Sewer Authority to discuss any potential complications related to the placement of bridges at both locations. There's a wastewater interceptor that runs through the project area that would impact where piers could be placed for the Chesapeake Street landing site. Engineers would need to ensure that the bridge abutments and piers avoid that easement area. But the Rivanna Wastewater and Sewer Authority also indicated that additional parking could be accommodated at that site if access to the manhole was maintained and kept clear. So this would continue to be a viable solution if it is an initiative that that needs further pursuit moving forward at some point. The East Market Street site does not present the same challenges regarding utilities, though existing wastewater interceptor does not have impacts of that site. So there are less obstacles that have to be navigated as far as utilities at the East Market Street site. And then while mitigating environmental impacts is an important factor in planning transportation projects and will be part of the overall project evaluation, there do not appear to be significant differences in the environmental considerations between the two sites as far as habitat disruption or water quality considerations. The Rivanna Conservation Alliance has a stream bank restoration project in Riverview Park near the Chesapeake Street landing site that they hope to undertake soon. And the proposed bridge landing site would not interfere with the planned project that they are undertaking. The Stakeholder Advisory Committee also discussed that there may be challenges maintaining the area around the pier located on the mid-river island at the East Market Street site, landing site, to keep it clear of litter and debris. Because it requires that someone accesses the site from the river, that just presents a slightly bigger challenge for regular maintenance at that location. So there was some concern that there would be more accumulation of litter and debris at that pier, which would be very visible to anybody looking at the bridge. And then because this portion of the Rivanna River is a scenic river designation, there are two sets of considerations that we talked about regarding the visual impact of the bridge in the river area, which are really important just in terms of how this bridge could have an impact on transforming the experience of being along the river. So the first consideration is the type of bridge, which is what we were discussing a little bit earlier in this presentation, that could be constructed at the two locations. And the other is the impact of what that bridge would do based on where the bridge is placed or the location. There have been 3 designs that have been determined as feasible at the two locations. So at the top is the cable-stayed bridge, in the middle is a standard truss bridge, and then at the bottom is an arch truss bridge. If you recall from the renderings shown at the beginning of the presentation, the consultants that completed the feasibility study sketched a cable-stayed bridge at the Chesapeake Street alignment and an arched truss bridge at the East Market Street alignment. In terms of cost, the standard truss bridge, so the one shown here in the middle, is the least expensive design, and then the cable-stayed bridge is the most expensive of the designs that are shown here. Because there is a really lovely view along the stretch of the river, there's been some consideration for developing a bridge that has an aesthetically pleasing design that will not detract from the overall river corridor experience. And then this slide also shows the potential view of the river from the approximate location of the bridge over the river. And I want to thank Piedmont Environmental Council for taking these photos and making them available for use tonight. And I'll just show you, there's a panoramic of each of these, which would show what the view would look like from each of the bridge locations. I'm gonna go ahead and click on that. Let's see. And so this would be approximately if you were, I don't know. I lost it. Are you all seeing the panoramic of the bridge? My screen stopped sharing. So that shows you what the view would look like from the first bridge at the one at the Chesapeake Street landing site. And this would show you at the second site a little bit south at East Market Street. This shows you what the view would look like from the bridge at that location. So you can see the differences there. All right. So while there is a greater visual impact along an otherwise open stretch of river at the Chesapeake Street alignment, which is this top alignment right here, the Stakeholder Advisory Committee discussed how this also provides an opportunity for a greater range of the public to be able to experience this view that can currently only be experienced by those that are floating or boating on the river right now. On the other hand, the bridge at the East Market Street alignment, which this would be sort of the approximate view from the East Market Street bridge, it would cross after there's a bend in the river, so it would not provide a significant disruption to an otherwise open view of the river, but it would provide a greater overlook opportunity to what has been referred to as the sediment islands, which is actually a very stable landmass. That has been a question that's come up, and it can support the construction of a pier. The Stakeholder Advisory Committee discussed how even though the view of the river from this bridge at East Market Street isn't quite as significant as the location, at this location as it is at the other location, it does provide some overlook opportunities to make users aware of local historic resources throughout the river corridor and could be accompanied by informational markers along the bridge structure. And then we also discussed how the bridge location may impact the desired design of the bridge. So while the alignment at Chesapeake Street will offer better views of the river, there's also a desire expressed for the bridge at this location to have a lighter design to minimize the visual disruption of the view shed. Whereas a more industrial design may not feel as out of place at the bridge alignment going to East Market Street. We also spent a lot of time talking in the Stakeholder Advisory Committee meetings about how a bridge at either of these locations may impact local residents near either of these sites. Whether a bridge near a residential area is desirable or not is largely a matter of individual perspectives and priorities. So what one person sees as a positive impact, somebody else might see as a negative impact. It really depends on how much direct access to a location of interest the bridge provides for an individual, and how much that is a priority versus how much new disruptions or changes to the existing landscape might present more of a negative impact to another user. The concerns that were raised through our Stakeholder Advisory Committee discussions are shown here. There are concerns about the additional strain to the parking infrastructure available in the area, which we discussed earlier. There's concerns about additional vehicular traffic through the residential areas. Most notably, this was a larger point of discussion for the bridge landing at East Market Street, but both areas would have potentially additional impacts on the amount of vehicular traffic that would impact the neighbors in the area. And then there's also a desire and expectation from residents in the local communities that Riverview Park will be maintained as a natural area, as well as the visual impact of the bridge landing site, just disrupting the experience of being in either the neighborhood or the park, presenting a negative impact that some users felt needed to be considered as part of the evaluation of these two bridge options. So one quick thing while we're discussing impacts that I just want to go ahead and emphasize is that it's really outside the scope of this project to discuss some of the impacts that are already being experienced. We are considering the incremental impact of this bridge on some of the pre-existing concerns though. And so to the extent that it is appropriate, this bridge could involve some mitigation measures that are directly related to the impacts that this bridge could cause. to help reduce negative impacts. That can be things like landscaping or buffering, pavement markings, wayfinding signage, those kinds of things could be considered as part of this project. But those decisions would be discussed at a later phase of the project if funding is approved for either one of those sites. And then finally, I referenced this briefly, but we can discuss the cost estimates in a little more detail. I mentioned earlier that these were planning level feasibility study cost estimates. So there are additional engineering details that will be further reviewed and developed during the application process. And then once the actual engineering design work starts, those estimates will be better defined. These costs can give us an initial estimate of the relative differences in cost for the two alignments under consideration though. In addition to a better refined base cost estimate that will be prepared once the bridge alignment and design types are identified, additional contingencies will be added based on the variability of certain costs that won't be determined until project engineering and construction design is already underway. And then because VDOT approves project funding several years out from the time of the application, there's also an inflation cost escalation that is applied based on the anticipated project construction cost date. What this means is that the final project cost that is determined for the purposes of the application will be higher than either of the numbers that you see here. And this will be true for every project that is submitted as a smart scale application. So this is not unique to us. And in that sense, it is a level playing field as far as how we are potentially penalized by the cost escalations. So what I want to do next is do a couple of quick poll questions to see what the preferences are based on everything that we reviewed today. But I know I just covered a lot of information. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and see what questions we might have. So the first question in the chat that I see is from Ms. Russell that says, this is such an exciting opportunity for the region, and I appreciate the opportunity to learn more, hear concerns, and contribute. She says, what options does TJPDC think presents the strongest smart scale application? So I'm going to start off, and then I'd be happy to turn it over to any of the other panelists. Maybe Chuck might want to answer. But I think as far as feasibility, I think probably the benefit scores are probably going to be pretty similar to between the two bridges. So I think what will most likely determine what makes one more competitive than the other is likely going to be related to the cost impacts. But Chuck, I would love for you to respond, or any of the other panelists if you'd like to jump in, feel free.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the alignment it's probably going to be similar benefit score, overall benefit score. The cost is going to be the more critical item. And that just depends on the Chesapeake Street alignment is the shorter of the two alignments. So it's going to probably have a less cost, overall cost, because the distance is shorter, because most bridge work is done on a linear foot or square footage bridge deck type of calculation. So the shorter the bridge, the less the cost. Basically, I personally think the Woolen Mills crossing is probably the best location, just because of mainly, the main reason for that is the connection at Chesapeake Street for any of the structures is going to be low because you're tying into the existing grade. So that means you're taking off at Chesapeake Street, and the structure is going to be coming across the park at a very low elevation. So aesthetically, that may be not something that the people that use the park want to see on a regular basis when they're enjoying the park. The Woolen Mills Bridge basically takes off at the edge of the road over the river. So you don't have that aesthetic impact directly in a park area that you're going to have at the Riverside Park. But basically, those are the two options. And that's what we're asking your opinions on, which ones you would prefer, which location you prefer, and which bridge type. As has been discussed, the truss bridge, it's it is going to be the cheapest, significantly cheaper than the other two options. It's just, is it the most aesthetically pleasing bridge you want to have to look at when you're using the river and in the park? That's something that we put them in there as options for consideration, and we gave costs associated with them. And those are the two items that we're trying to identify with this survey and this public meeting is what's the alignment that you guys want to look at? And then what type of bridge do you want to see here? And those are the two options that you need to consider.
Thanks, Chuck. And then one of the questions came through is were the cost estimates done before COVID? If I remember correctly, I'll tell y'all what, I'm having a hard time even remembering when exactly COVID started, but I think that the feasibility study was completed near the end of 2020. Do you know when the cost estimates were developed, Chuck? In that process?
Probably about that time frame, because that was one of the last things they would have done for the study.
So it would have been kind of midway through the first year of COVID. Okay. Are there any other questions? Does anybody else have another question before we move forward with the poll? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. So we have two poll questions, and for those of you who have seen the survey, these are probably going to look pretty similar to what you've seen on the survey, but we want to go ahead and make sure you all have the opportunity to gosh. Okay, I'm going to. So you're going to see. Can't do multiple things at one time. So let me go ahead and bring the poll question up. They'll bring the presentation back up. So the first poll question is which of the two alignments do you prefer? And so you can go ahead and we'll give you just a second based on what you've already seen. Another 15 seconds or so. All right, so out of 18 responses, it looks like we had about 72% preferring Chesapeake Street and about 28% that preferred East Market Street. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and launch the second poll. And this is it's a two-part question, so you can answer the question for one or both of these based on the locations of the two bridges. Which bridge design do you prefer for Chesapeake Street, and then which bridge design do you prefer for East Market Street alignment? Okay. Give it another 15 seconds or so. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. You all can see that as far as the Chesapeake Street alignment, there was a stronger preference for the cable-stayed bridge. And then at the East Market Street alignment, there was, it's actually pretty split between the cable-stayed option, the standard truss, the arch truss, and then not preferring a bridge at the location. So So it does look like there's maybe a slightly stronger visual preference for the Chesapeake Street alignment compared to the East Market Street alignment. All right, thank you all for that input. So one question that came up, and Chris, you might be, Christiansek, you might be the best person to answer this question, is that isn't the, let's see if I can find it again in the chat. Oh, Chris already answered it. So there was a question in the chat that asked about whether the Riverview Bridge proposed alignment comes in at a different area from the park that's not currently utilized as park space. And for those of you that didn't see that answer, that area of the park used to be the pumping station, and they have not yet come to any community consensus on what it might be used for in the future, if anything. So it just hasn't been part of a planned use for the park at this point. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop there and see if, before we go on to discuss next steps, if there are any other questions and answers that have not been addressed. If you'd like to either type a question into the Q&A or raise your hand, I'll be happy to call on you. No? Right. Otherwise, you guys are taking it kind of easy on us tonight. All right, so what are we gonna do next? I mentioned previously, oh, there's a raised hand. I knew that would happen. Go ahead. Go ahead, Liz, you can, or Ms. Russell, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thanks, Sandy. I am pulled over in my car because I'm trying to pay attention. There's some discussion in the chat about the earlier audience members' design and could it be considered? And I didn't fully catch what he was recommending, but I do think maybe it could be made more clear by you or by Chuck that, correct me if I'm wrong, this process, the build, the design, the engineering, it'll all be subject to VDOT standards. So, I mean, while it sounds great that we'd love to utilize UVA's engineering school, I don't think that's a possibility in a VDOT project. And perhaps even maybe there's elements about that design that he mentioned that would not meet the standards that they're going to require for a smart scale project.
Sure, yeah, that's a good question. Regarding one of the bridge options alignments that is not being discussed tonight, there was a third option that was developed by one of the members of the CTAC community. That bridge option was brought forth to the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. They determined that they would not like to move forward with considering the project any further at that point. So that's why that project is not being discussed. It hadn't been vetted to the same extent as the two bridge alignments that were being considered as part of the feasibility study. And then there were some additional concerns about the feasibility from the Charlottesville Parks and Recreation Department because it would involve a number of piers going through Riverview Park. So that was not moved forward because there wasn't support at this point. And then as far as using the UVA school, I think, Chuck, you may be in a better position to respond to what the design and engineering requirements are regarding whether that is a feasible option or what the requirements are from VDOT's perspective.
Yeah, that's not a process that we normally use. We use the universities as consultants on studies, but from design standpoint, we have, at least I'm not aware of any that we've used them on. We generally use either in-house or our own call consultants to do the actual design work.
Thank you.
And I'm not saying that the costs that were on here are the final costs. The ones that we showed are, like I said, if you wanted to go with one of these other types of bridges that you might want to see out there other than a simple truss bridge, then the cost will be lower than what we were showing as the preliminary cost estimates. And that's one of the items that we're trying to get feedback on moving forward.
Thank you. Any other questions before we talk about next steps and what we're going to do from here to make a decision? All right. Okay, so we're still collecting information from the public on the different bridge options. So the MetroQuest survey, which hopefully many of you have already taken, is going to be open until March 4th. So you can continue to share the word about that opportunity. I'm going to be working on compelling information based on the MPO's discussion with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. We'll be taking feedback from this meeting, and then we'll also be sharing the results from the public survey for the policy board to consider and review at a special meeting on March 10th. And then at the regular meeting on March 23rd, the policy board will determine the preferred alignment and design that will be moved forward as a funding application. As far as the state schedule for submitting the funding application, pre-applications will be due on March 31st, and then final applications for the project will need to be submitted by the end of August. There are some additional discussions that will be held with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee after the March 31st pre-application deadline regarding some of the design considerations that aren't essential to have in place prior to the pre-application. But the alignment and design will be set once the pre-application is submitted. All right, and then that basically concludes everything that we had prepared for you all tonight. So I'm going to leave this slide up because it shows the project website if you want more information on the stakeholder meeting discussions, or if you want to take the survey, or if you want to learn more about the other smart scale projects, you can also navigate through that link and probably get back to the regular smart scale projects that way to learn more about any of those projects. And then my email address is on the screen as well if you want to submit any comments after this meeting with your thoughts. I'd also be happy to receive those. So with that said, we can go ahead and see if there are any final questions or comments. One of the questions says, will there be any access to the Chesapeake Street Bridge directly from Riverview Park? I believe the landing site would come out pretty close to Chesapeake Street, and so it would provide some access to Riverview Park, at least along the existing sidewalk and paths. But Chris, would you be able to better respond to that question?
Certainly, it would land on the corner of Riverside Avenue and Chesapeake, where the old pump station used to be. So yeah, it would definitely, you'd come across the bridge and then basically do like a U-turn back into the park entrance where that sidewalk is now, right by the park entry sign.
Thanks, Chris. And then there's a question. I'm wondering how the bridge will be lit and how it will appear at night. That is something that we just started discussing with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, that there probably is some requirement that there's some lighting provided, but we want to make sure that it is compatible with the dark sky ordinances and doesn't involve too much intrusion on the environmental experience, you know, to make sure that that's not a detraction. So that's something that we can have more discussions about between the pre-application and the application deadlines to have some more discussions. And then let's see. Oh, and my apologies, the final applications are due by August 1st, not the 31st. So yeah, but we'll still have time to have those discussions between the pre-application deadline and the application deadline. And then I think that's it for the questions and comments that have come through the chat. So let's go ahead and open it up to live questions, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Rosenbell. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. So this is all great, what you've presented. There's clearly a lot to bite off and chew here. And I am curious about why it just seems that the consideration of what the design of the bridge is seems somewhat premature. And that, clearly the bridge needs to be considered in terms of how the city engages the river, or the community engages the river. Because at this point, Charlottesville has more or less turned its back on the river, and this bridge is a major component of that. So I'm just curious about moving forward, and I put it in the chat. Would there be consideration of perhaps holding a competition for a bridge design? And just as a footnote, I'm part of a footbridge community that is predominantly populated by European bridge designers. And there's a lot of just fantastic stuff that's out there, that it would be wonderful to see that as part of this process. So.
Yeah, I can take an initial attempt at answering that. And I think maybe one of the challenges we have is the specific funding mechanism that we're pursuing for this bridge. But I don't know if, and because it's a transportation project, we're going to have to meet all of those transportation elements. But Chuck, do you know if there's been any sort of community design competition type of thing that has occurred for any of these bridges in our state through Smart Scale?
I don't know. I can't really answer that question. I mean, I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea, but I don't know if it could be done as part of a Smart Scale project. If you wanted to do a competition and come up with a design and then submit that design for Smart Scale, that might be a way to do that. But I don't think you could fund the competition with this as part of the Smart Scale process.
And this is Chris with the city. I would imagine, and a couple comments might answer some of those. Once we get a design engineering firm online, and Chuck might answer this, if someone says, hey, look at this bridge, would this bridge meet all the criteria and also meet the community needs? If we give those examples to a design firm and say, hey, if you can make it meet ADA and transportation, a cable stayed or a whatever type of bridge that other people might have examples from other towns or Europe, whatever. If we can give that to the design firm and say, hey, if you can make it work, is that a possible thing where like even the one that Ms. Malik's been showing us, so we give those to the design firm and say, hey, run this through your analysis, and if it meets all the codes, it's feasible or it's not feasible. Is that an option, Chuck?
I mean, there's a lot of options there, and that's what it comes down to: cost. Some of the options are much more expensive than others. So it's hard to actually hit that target if it's moving so much. And there's a lot of stuff that goes into it that are unknowns, because we don't know what the geology is out there until we actually go out there and start boring and finding out what's there. So you don't know what kind of bridge foundations you're going to need. And different bridges have different foundation criteria. So there's a lot of stuff that plays into it. And it's like Lee said earlier, yeah, a simple truss bridge is probably going to be the cheapest way to go. But is it what you want to see from a aesthetic standpoint for that design? I don't know. And that's why we came up with, from the feasibility study, we looked at these two locations seem to be the best locations for the structure. What type of structure do you want to see out there? And then we try to show several different options that would be feasible. So it's just a matter of which ones do you want to look at? I mean, we can look at something like Ann showed. I mean, there's examples. There's one that crosses the Missouri River that's similar to what Ann shows. It's 3,000 feet long. So it's not something that's not doable, but we're looking at a almost 600-foot bridge that's got to cross the river. The bridge that she's showing, I don't think that type of design would necessarily work. I'm not sure. And the cost would probably be much more because it's twice as long. And it was 16, 17 years ago when that was built. So there's a big difference in the cost from that perspective. So those are things that we need to, but there's a few things we need to answer before we can start to look at those other options.
And we are going to try to get some more information on some of that, but the jury's out at this point as to what exactly will fit into our opportunities for there to be an adjustment later in the process. Go ahead, Mr. Ignatz.
Again, you gave estimates on costs for the single state and the arch bridge, but you didn't give anything on the truss bridge. And I think it's a real disservice to the community to not talk about the cost of the truss style bridge, which is going to be arguably the least expensive. And so I don't understand why you're going with the two most expensive options. It just makes no sense to me.
Well, that's just to give us a baseline. We're trying to be very transparent about what the most and least expensive options will be, but these were just the two designs that were considered as part of the feasibility studies to help us give us some sort of metric to base discussions off of moving forward. It's not intended that we're not considering pursuing those. Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, with that, we can go ahead and wrap up. Again, we'll be posting this webinar to the project website. And then, like I said, there are going to be additional opportunities for the public to weigh in, either through the MetroQuest survey or through the, there's a public comment form on our main Smart Scale project website on the MPO webpage. So you're welcome to provide any additional feedback. Otherwise, I really appreciate everyone joining us this evening. And yeah, we appreciate your engagement. We will look forward to moving this project forward to the next phase. Thank you all.